Good morning. My name is Patricia Devine, and I am a member of the Worship and Music Committee. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Welcome to our virtual service with First Parish Plymouth congregation. These services will be posted to our Facebook page and they appear on YouTube. The first part of our service is recorded. Following the benediction, the recording will end. Then we will go into our candles of joys and concerns. This section is not recorded. Our service today is entitled Begin the World Anew and is presented by Reverend Arthur Lavoie. Our technical director is Chris Lennon. We hope you stay for our virtual coffee hour after the service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever you believe, wherever you are on your journey, come walk with us this hour. Let us walk together this hour. The call to worship this morning is John 1:1-15. In the beginning, there was the divine word and wisdom. The divine word and wisdom was there with God, and it was what God was. It was there with God from the beginning. Everything came to be by means of it. Nothing that exists came to be without its agency. In it was life, and this life was the light of humanity. Light was shining in darkness, and darkness did not master it. Our opening hymn this morning is number 350, The Ceaseless Flow of Endless Time.
The ceaseless flow of endless time, no one can take or stay. We'll view the past with no regret, no future with dismay. The present slips into the past and dream like clouds away. The breaking of tomorrow's dawn begins anew today. The past and future ever meet in the eternal now, to make each day a thing complete shall be our New Year vow.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Reverend Arthur Lavoie. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. My pronouns are he, him, and his. As I light the chalice, please join me with the words printed on your screen. Love is the spirit
of this
and service is its law. This is our great covenant. Dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, to speak
We need superheroes right now more than ever. We need to imagine a better world, and we need to work towards it. So today, I will tell you the story of Olympia Brown. When Olympia Brown was a little girl, little girls weren't supposed to whistle. Girls weren't supposed to climb trees or run fast or catch frogs, but Olympia did. She did all those things and more. You can do whatever a boy can do, her mother and her father told her, and Olympia knew it was true. She climbed trees and ran fast and caught frogs, and when she was in school, she answered the teacher's questions loud and clear. Little girls ought to be quiet, said one lady in town one day. Little girls ought not to make themselves heard. But Olympia did. When Olympia Brown was a teenager, young women weren't supposed to go to college. Young women weren't supposed to leave home and go off and learn complicated things. But Olympia did. She did all those things and more. Olympia left home and went to Antioch College. She went to class and studied and learned all kinds of complicated things. Young women ought not to go to college, the professor of one of her classes said at school. But since they are here, they must read their reports. Young women ought not to give speeches from memory like men do. But Olympia did. When it was her turn to present her report, she rolled up the papers in her hand and said each and every word loud and clear. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she was going to use it every day. When Olympia Brown was in college, women weren't supposed to wear pants. Women weren't supposed to wear anything except very long dresses that came all the way down to their toes. But Olympia did. She wore dresses that came down only past her knees, and under them she dared to wear pants. Bloomers, the pants were called, after Amelia Bloomer, the woman who had created them a few years before. Women ought not show their ankles in public, exclaimed some men, and women certainly ought not wear pants, but Olympia did. When Olympia had finished college, women weren't supposed to be ministers. Women never stood up in front of a congregation and never talked about God, but Olympia did. She did all of those things and more. Olympia graduated from the theological school at St. Lawrence University in 1863, and she was ordained as a Universalist minister in June of that year. The second woman ever to be officially ordained by that church. She became the Reverend Olympia Brown. Women ought not speak in public, said a minister at the time. Women ought not take the pulpit or discuss the nature of God. But Reverend Olympia Brown did. During the next 35 years, she was a minister in 5 different congregations, and she visited other congregations too. She took the pulpit in every single one, and she spoke of the nature of God and the nature of love, and she did an excellent job. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she used it every day. When Olympia Brown was born, women weren't allowed to vote. Women weren't allowed to have any say in who was elected president or senator or mayor of the town. But Olympia had something to say about that. Olympia had a lot to say about that. She traveled all over the state of Kansas in a horse and buggy, giving speeches to convince people that women deserved the right to vote. She wrote hundreds of letters. She spoke to representatives and senators in Congress. She marched in parades. Olympia and her friends worked hard to get women the right to vote. Olympia Brown had a voice. She used it every day for over 50 years. And finally, when Olympia Brown was old, women were allowed to vote. In November of 1920, when Olympia was 85 years old, she voted for the very first time. Olympia had always had a voice, and she used it, and she made sure that all other women in the United States had a voice as well.
In a culture of violence, dreaming a new dream. Leslie Marmon Silko, a Laguna Pueblo author, begins
Excuse
her.
me, Patricia,
Yes.
I didn't unmute you at the very beginning, so can you start from the beginning?
Yes.
Thank you.
Our reading this morning is by George Tinker, Racism and Anti-Racism in a Culture of Violence, Dreaming a New Dream. Leslie Marmon Silko, a Laguna Pueblo author, begins her great American Indian novel, Ceremony, with a poem dedicated to Spider-Woman, the creatrix of Laguna mythology. In the Laguna explanation of the world, Spider-Woman creates by thinking, and whatever she thinks appears. In this poem, since creation is never completely done with, Spider-Woman is thinking into existence the very story that Silko is writing. The story of the healing of a person.
For some reason, we're not on.
Good. That's so distracting to me.
Of a people or a whole world. It is no different for non-Lagunas. All of us live in an imagined, thought-up world, a social and mental construct. Our task is either to imagine the future of this world into existence together, or to let it be imagined for us and to play out the roles that others will impose on us. I want to suggest that we can and must begin to create our world anew, to think it anew, to dream it anew, and to dream out of existence violence. To reimagine out of our world the abuse and subjection of women and the racialization of Blacks, Reds, Yellows, Whites, and Browns. If we are not intentional about engaging such a process, I fear we are doomed to mere repetitions of the past.
This week, we experienced an unprecedented attack on American democracy. It was fueled by lies from the president in what appears to be an attempted coup to bolster his fragile ego and retain power. We can condemn him and his followers, but we know that human beings regularly ignore facts and follow their baser instincts. And that only scratches the surface of what stories people will believe and how they and we will act on those beliefs. There will always be religious fanatics and political fascists who create a myth or story that preys upon people's fears and leads them to ignore more truthful and factual realities. The story of Hitler and the rise of fascism in Germany is often the best example of someone who offers people a story about a better world that fits this mold, blames another group for their difficult times, and offers a solution that binds people together under a common purpose. You know, I remember, I think it was about 10 years ago, maybe a little more, there was this Christian evangelist who predicted the end of the world. Some people sold all their belongings and went and followed this crackpot up into a desert in Arizona, I think it was. And when the world did not end, he redid his calculations and said he was off by about 6 months. And the new date in the fall of that year came and went rather quietly, and we're all still here. And let's not forget the tragedy of Jim Jones. Some of us are old enough to remember him. He led another apocalyptic group called the People's Temple. They built a compound. Most of them are from the US. They built a compound in Guyana, South America, in the mid-1970s. Leo Ryan, a congressman, flew with a congressional team to investigate reports that people were being held at this compound against their will. Leo Ryan and his team were murdered on the airstrip, and Jim Jones and over 900 of his followers drank Kool-Aid laced with cyanide in what may be the largest mass suicide in history. The phrase drinking the Kool-Aid has since entered popular culture and is used when someone has embraced without question the plan or ideology of another. Whether it's a political leader or a religious one, many people want someone else to give them truth, the truth. It can be comforting, I suppose, to follow the crowd or to follow a charismatic leader, even when that goes against our better judgment. We tend to enjoy conspiracy theories and doomsday scenarios. We seem to like being the underdog who fights for a supposedly noble cause and prevails, or who goes down fighting for one's principles. Perhaps we enjoy the emotional drama of it all. I wonder, though, if many of us carry around a feeling of being powerless, a feeling that something is wrong, and we're unable to change it on our own. Perhaps a sense that we're lost in the crowd, that the world and other people are not conforming to what may be our expectations. And then we follow some starry-eyed leader who spouts the things we want to hear, regardless of the truth or validity of those pronouncements. And this grand change that some people long for, perhaps all of us at some time, will at the very least be cathartic and wake us up and have everybody see things differently. For some, this kind of cataclysmic event will vindicate them, will prove them or us right. Many of us have some idea in our head. It might not be earth-shattering or an apocalyptic idea, but many of us have an idea or agenda that stands in contrast to what some people might think, and we are hoping for something big to prove our point. Dr. Tinker reminds us that we live in an imagined, thought-up world, and that our worldview is a social and mental construct. Each of us has imagined a slightly different story of who we are and what the world is like. We interpret our everyday experiences based on our own internal story. The story many of us have carried around, perhaps since childhood, but at least for many years. Many of us can have the same or similar experiences and come out with a different internal story, different interpretations of what happened. When I look at this congregation, for example, First Parish in Plymouth, I could tell a story about what is or was possible. I could highlight the religious idealism and perseverance of Pilgrim forebears and their commitment to religious freedom, covenantal relationship, and a fledgling democratic movement. But that would only be part of the story, wouldn't it? We're now learning to imagine, to understand a more complete story that talks about the oppression of Indigenous peoples. And we can do that while still retaining some of the values and ideals that made all of what we have today possible. The same thing happens when each of us looks at our own lives. Some will see their successes, the possibilities unfolding. Some will only see how they have missed out on dreams and opportunities. At some point in our adult lives, many of us realize that some parts of the story we know about ourselves, our families, and the world is no longer true to our experience, no longer the story we want to tell. So we do the hard work to change our story, to tell a different part of it, perhaps, to heal old wounds, to realign our self-perception with the truth we have come to know, the truths we want to embody going forward. If we don't claim our own identity, our own story, we allow others to define our lives for us. We also have myths and stories about people who are different from us. We live in a world where we are separated from each other by things like race, class, nationality, gender, age, sexual identity, and orientation and ability. And then we let some of those lines of separation define us, and we stand in opposition to each other based on our differences or perceived differences. Out of fear or discomfort, perhaps, we forget how easy it might be to get to know each other for who they are and to treat them with the love and respect that we hope they would extend to us. Another popular way of thinking that pervades our society and was fully evident this week is the fiercely individualistic culture that puts self above all else. We tend to think the First Amendment only pertains to individual rights, and we don't perceive any responsibility to other people. We've lost our sense of the importance of the common good, what it means to be in covenantal relationship, and how vital human interaction continues to be for our well-being. Our need for each other is one thing we may hopefully learn from this pandemic. This thinking that separates us is the same kind of thinking that dehumanizes others and produces violence in our hearts, in our homes, and on our streets. It would be great if we could think violence and bad behavior out of existence, if we could imagine a new world and then it would appear. That kind of cataclysmic event is not going to happen. It will take much more than thinking and imagining on our parts to create this new world, to create a new life for ourselves. But imagining is where we must begin. Questions, though, for all of us this morning are, what is the story that you want to embody in your life now? What is the story that you want to tell about yourself and the world around you? What is the story that best embodies your convictions and your religious values? There was a great opinion piece in the Boston Globe by Joanna Weiss several years ago that I keep remembering and returning to. She was writing about the meaning of guns in our society, but her analysis applies on a much greater scale and shows how a different story can change our collective thinking. In her article, Joanna Weiss reminds us that changing the image of cigarette smoking did more than any laws or taxes to encourage people to stop smoking. Only when cigarettes became uncool, unhealthy, and somewhat shameful were we able to see the numbers of smokers drop dramatically. Whether the issue is this rabid personal freedom that has no responsibility for others, or guns that are equated with strength and manliness, we need to create an opposite narrative. What if we started saying that it was unmanly to have a gun, to need this prop to support your personhood? What if we were to say that, it's only sissies that don't take responsibility for other people? That the manly practice, the human practice, was looking out for and listening to each other face to face. In order to begin the world anew, we have to dream a different dream, embody different ideals, and begin by imagining a different story. The divine work we are called to in the ongoing co-creation of ourselves and of the world begins with a shift in our perceptions and our worldview. Now, you're going to have to bear with me because I'm a bit of a biblical wonk sometimes. And I love what we had this morning as our call to worship. The Gospel of John, the most kind of out there of the four Gospels, begins with what many scholars regard as a hymn to creation. It was probably something that was a chant and that had music attached to it. And it usually, in all the translations I have seen before this one, begins with the words, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God." And so here we have a translation that says, "In the beginning there was the divine Word and wisdom." And I love this new translation of this opening passage. Both word and wisdom are named in what scholars have described as his hymn of creation. Now, as I remember my biblical theology, which is often tied to Greek philosophy because most of the Bible was written in Greek, word or logos is the male principle. Wisdom is the female principle. Here we find word and wisdom woven together as one. They give order to the universe and link the human mind to the mind of God. Unfortunately, wisdom, the female principle, has nearly been obliterated from biblical literature. But scholars see threads in different places of where wisdom should be mentioned or continues to be mentioned. It's now being found and rediscovered again, the principle of wisdom that corresponds to word. Spider-Woman, in the mythology of the Laguna peoples, thinks, dreams, and sings the world into existence, using word and wisdom once again. In the web that Spider-Woman weaves as she creates the world, all of life, all of creation is ordered and connected. All that exists according to these two different theologies, the Laguna theology and the theology found in John, comes through word, thought, wisdom, and reason. All of creation is imagined, spoken, or sung into reality. We too have the power to create and to co-create with the divine beings of every tradition. We are part of that divinity in the sacred circle of life. We use its tools to heal or to harm, to give life or to take it away. We can tell the stories and embody the principle of creation or of destruction. Or we can also let others define it for us if we don't use our voice, our imagination, and our vision. We can step into a new era. This can be an era where we are called upon to move beyond our limited view of the world and to embrace a larger whole, to be fully present as we create something new out of the ashes of our past struggles. Let us all vow and promise in this new year, in this new decade, to let that divine word and wisdom shine through us as we tell a new story, embody new ideals, sing a new song, weaving our lives with all of those around us into a world of compassion, justice, healing, and peace. Amen. And blessed be. I invite you now to join in singing hymn number 12, O Life That Maketh All Things New. In the beginning, there was the divine word and wisdom. From our call to worship from this new translation of the Gospel of John. This divine word and wisdom was part of the living, breathing act of creation. It brought the light and the life of humanity. Light was shining in darkness, and darkness did not master it, concludes that hymn. For us too, the new imagining, the new dreaming of a world that is different from the one that we have been a part of, that our lives are different, that we all live by our best values and highest ideals, that we listen deeply to other people, that justice equity, and compassion are the hallmark of who we are. We can bring that into existence. But first, we have to dream it, imagine it, and believe it in ourselves. Go with that message and have a wonderful week. Amen. And blessed be.